Anime fans recommend shows all the time. Everywhere you look online, someone is saying, you have to watch this anime. But I started wondering, are those recommendations actually good? So I decided to test it. I watched 30 different anime recommended by the internet, from massive fan favorites to hidden gems most people don't talk about. And honestly, some of them completely blew my expectations away. But a few of them, yeah, those were definitely overhyped. So today, I'm going through all 30 anime I watched, the ones that surprised me the most, and the ones that absolutely deserve the hype. Number 1, Code Geass. I'm honestly surprised it took me this long to properly watch Code Geass, because this anime is basically what happens if you mix political warfare, giant robots, and one of the smartest protagonists in anime. The story follows Lelouch, a student who suddenly gains a power called Geass, which allows him to command anyone to do anything, once. And Lelouch immediately decides to use that power to start a rebellion against an entire empire. What makes this anime so good isn't just the action, it's the mind games. Every episode feels like a strategic chess match, where Lelouch is constantly trying to outsmart the military, manipulate enemies, and stay 10 steps ahead of everyone. But the real reason people love Code Geass? The plot twist. This show has some of the most insane, wait, what just happened? Moments in anime, and the ending. Without spoiling anything, let's just say it's one of the most legendary endings in anime history. If you like big brain strategies, political drama, and anime with massive plot twists, Code Geass absolutely deserves the hype. Honestly, the twists in this show are insane. Number 2, Steins Gate. Now, Steins Gate is one of those anime that people constantly recommend. But I'll be honest, the first few episodes had me wondering why everyone hyped this show so much. Because at first, it feels like you're just watching a group of nerdy friends messing around in a tiny apartment lab. You've got Okabe, a self-proclaimed mad scientist who takes himself way too seriously. You've got Kurisu, the genius scientist who constantly calls him out. And then the rest of the group who are basically helping run ridiculous experiments. But slowly, something strange starts happening. Their experiments accidentally create a way to send messages to the past, and that's when the story completely changes. What starts as goofy time experiments suddenly turns into a serious time travel thriller. Every decision begins to have consequences. Every timeline change creates new problems, and Okabe slowly realizes that fixing one mistake might create 10 more disasters. The emotional weight of the story hits hard in the second half, and by the end, Steins Gate becomes one of those anime where you realize all the slow setup in the beginning was completely worth it. Because when everything finally connects, it's honestly one of the best time travel stories anime has ever done. Number 3, Made in Abyss. This Eshe's Now Made in Abyss is one of the most misleading anime I've ever watched. Because when you first see it, it looks like a cute adventure story. The characters are small, the art style is soft, and it almost feels like a fantasy kids show. But then you start watching it, and you quickly realize this show is not messing around. The story follows a girl named Riko who wants to explore a massive, mysterious pit called the Abyss. This place is basically a giant vertical world filled with ancient ruins, strange creatures, and secrets nobody fully understands. But there's one terrifying rule. The deeper you go into the abyss, the harder it becomes to come back up, because ascending causes something called the curse of the abyss, which can cause things like intense pain, hallucinations, or even worse. So when Riko decides to descend deeper and deeper into the abyss, with a mysterious robot boy named Reg, the adventure slowly turns into something much darker. And that's what surprised me most about this anime. It starts like a fantasy adventure, but eventually becomes one of the most intense and emotional stories on this entire list. Beautiful world building, incredible music, and moments that will absolutely destroy you emotionally. Made in Abyss is definitely one of those anime where the cute art style hides a very heavy story underneath. Ao looks adorable, but that is extremely misleading, because the deeper the characters travel into the abyss, the darker and more disturbing the story becomes. Number 4, Gurren Lagann. Now, Gurren Lagann is pure anime chaos in the best possible way. The story starts underground, where humanity is basically forced to live in hidden villages beneath the surface. Nobody is allowed to go outside. Nobody questions the system, except for one guy, Kamina. This dude is basically pure confidence in human form. He believes there's an entire world above them, and he refuses to accept living underground forever. So together with Simon, a shy kid who discovers a strange little drill-shaped key, they accidentally uncover something incredible, a giant robot. And from that moment on, the scale of this anime just keeps escalating. Small fights turn into giant robot battles. Giant robot battles turn into planet-sized conflicts. And somehow it just keeps getting bigger. But what makes Gurren Lagann special isn't just the insane action, it's the message. This anime is all about believing in yourself and pushing past your limits. Every episode feels like it's yelling, "Don't give up, keep moving forward." And by the end of the series, the story becomes one of the most over-the-top, motivational, and unforgettable anime journeys ever made. Number 6, Mob Psycho 100. At first glance, Mob Psycho 100 looks kinda weird. The art style is messy, the characters look simple, and it doesn't really resemble most modern anime. But once you start watching it, you realize that's actually part of its charm. The story follows a middle schooler named Mob, who just happens to be one of the most powerful psychics in the world. He can bend spoons, exorcise spirits, and destroy entire buildings with his mind. But here's the thing, Mob doesn't actually want any of that. All he really wants is something completely normal. To become a better person and maybe impress the girl he likes. So instead of becoming some overpowered anime hero, Mob ends up working for a guy named Reagan, who runs a spirit exorcism business, despite having zero actual psychic powers. And their dynamic is honestly one of the funniest parts of the show. But the real magic of Mob Psycho 100 is its character growth. Mob isn't trying to become stronger, he's trying to become emotionally stronger. Learning confidence, learning how to connect with people, and learning that power doesn't actually define who you are. So while the show has some of the most insane animation and fight scenes in anime, at its core, Mob Psycho 100 is really a story about growing up and finding your place in the world. And that's what makes it so memorable. Number 7, Vinland Saga. Now, Vinland Saga feels very different from most anime on this list, because on the surface, it looks like a typical Viking revenge story. The main character, Thorfinn, grows up idolizing his father, a legendary warrior who believes that true warriors don't need swords. But early in the story, tragedy strikes. Thorfinn watches his father die at the hands of a mercenary leader named Askeladd. And from that moment on, Thorfinn dedicates his entire life to revenge. He joins the very same group of mercenaries who killed his father, waiting for the chance to challenge Askeladd in a duel. Season 1 is full of brutal battles, political schemes, and Viking warfare. But the real reason Vinland Saga stands out is what happens after the revenge story. Because eventually, the show starts asking a deeper question. What happens when revenge is the only thing driving your life, and suddenly it's gone? That's where the story becomes something much bigger than just a Viking action anime. It becomes a story about growth, redemption, and finding a new purpose in life. And by the time you reach the later parts of the story, Vinland Saga turns into one of the most powerful character journeys in modern anime. Number 8, Erased. Now, Erased is one of those anime that hooks you almost immediately. The story follows Satoru, a struggling manga artist who has a strange ability called revival. Whenever something bad is about to happen around him, time suddenly rewinds a few minutes, just enough for him to prevent the disaster. But one day, something much bigger happens. Satoru gets sent 18 years into the past, back to when he was a kid, and he quickly realizes why. When he was younger, several children in his town mysteriously disappeared, including one of his classmates. At the time, nobody figured out who was responsible. But now Satoru has a second chance. If he can figure out what really happened, he might be able to stop the murders before they ever happen. And that's where the anime becomes incredibly tense. Because while Satoru is trying to solve this mystery as a child, the killer is still out there, watching, waiting. And the closer Satoru gets to the truth, the more dangerous the situation becomes. What makes a race so powerful isn't just the mystery. It's the emotional story about friendship, childhood trauma, and protecting the people who were never protected before. And for a short anime, it manages to tell a very memorable and heartfelt story. Number 9, Parasite. Now, Parasite starts with a pretty terrifying idea. One night, strange alien organisms arrive on Earth. Their goal? Take over human bodies. These creatures enter through the ear or nose, reach the brain, and completely control the host. Once that happens, the human is basically gone. But the main character, Shinichi, gets incredibly lucky. Or incredibly unlucky, depending how you look at it. One of the parasites tries to enter his body while he's sleeping, but he wakes up just in time. So instead of reaching his brain, the parasite ends up taking over his right hand, which means Shinichi and this alien are now forced to live together. And the parasite, who later names itself Magi, is actually fascinating. It's logical, emotionless, and it sees humans purely as biological creatures. Meanwhile, Shinichi is still human. So throughout the series, the story constantly explores this tension between them, as more parasites begin secretly living among humans. Shinichi and Migi are pulled into a dangerous conflict with other parasites. And what makes Parasite really interesting is that it isn't just about action. It's about identity, about what separates humans from monsters. And sometimes the show even asks a very uncomfortable question. Are humans really that different from the parasites? It's intense, philosophical, and surprisingly emotional. And by the end of the story, Parasite becomes one of the most memorable sci-fi anime experiences out there. Number 10, Dororo. Now, Dororo has one of the most tragic opening stories on this entire list. The anime is set in feudal Japan during a time of war and chaos. A powerful warlord makes a horrifying deal with demons. He offers them his unborn child in exchange for power, land, and prosperity. And the demons accept. When the baby is born, almost everything is gone. No eyes, no arms, no legs. Even parts of his skin and senses are missing. The child is abandoned and left to die. But somehow, he survives. Years later, that child grows up to become Hayaki Maru, a warrior whose entire body is made from prosthetics. And every demon he kills allows him to regain a piece of his body. An eye, a limb, his hearing, his voice. Little by little, he's reclaiming what was stolen from him. Along the way, he meets a young thief named Dororo, and the two begin traveling together. And while the show has plenty of sword fights and demon battles, the real strength of Dororo is the emotional story underneath. Because every time Hyakumaru regains a part of himself, it raises a difficult question. If restoring his body brings suffering back to the land his father protected, should he keep fighting the demons at all? It's dark, emotional, and one of the most powerful samurai stories in anime. Number 11, Re:Zero. Now, Re:Zero starts like a pretty typical isekai setup. A normal guy named Subaru suddenly gets transported to a fantasy world. Magic exists. There are knights, kingdoms, and mysterious powers. At first, it feels like the beginning of a classic adventure. But then something very strange happens. Subaru dies. And instead of the story ending, he suddenly wakes up back at the beginning of the day. It turns out Subaru has a terrifying ability called Return by Death. Every time he dies, time resets to an earlier point, almost like a checkpoint in a video game. But there's a huge difference. Subaru remembers everything, every failure, every mistake, every painful death. And the more he tries to fix the future, the more complicated things become. Because even the smallest changes can create completely different timelines. What makes Re:Zero stand out from most isekai anime is how brutal it is emotionally. Subaru isn't some overpowered hero. He's just a regular guy trying to survive situations way beyond his control. And watching him slowly break down, learn, and grow as a person becomes the heart of the story. It's intense, sometimes frustrating, but incredibly compelling. And that's why Re:Zero ended up being one of the most memorable anime in this entire challenge. Number 12, The Promised Neverland. Now, The Promised Neverland has one of the most gripping first episodes in anime. The story takes place in what looks like a peaceful orphanage. The kids are happy, they're well fed. They play games, study, and live together like a big family. And the woman running the orphanage, who they call Mom, seems kind and caring. But there's one strange rule. The children are never allowed to leave the property. Whenever a kid gets adopted, they leave through the gate, and nobody ever hears from them again. At first, the kids think that's normal, until one night, two of them secretly follow a newly adopted child to the gate, and what they discover completely changes everything. Because the orphanage isn't what it seems. The children aren't being raised for adoption. They're being raised as food. From that moment on, the entire anime becomes a massive game of strategy. The kids have to secretly plan their escape while living under the constant watch of Mom, who is far more intelligent and dangerous than they expected. What makes The Promised Neverland so intense is the constant tension. Every conversation feels like a mind game. Every mistake could expose their plan. And the question becomes, can a group of children outsmart the system designed to control them? Number 13, Odd Taxi. Now, Odd Taxi is one of the most unexpected anime on this list, because when you first look at it, it almost seems too simple. The characters are animals, the animation style is minimal, and the main character is literally just a taxi driver. His name is Odokawa, and he spends his days driving people around the city while listening to their conversations. At first, it feels like a series of random encounters, different passengers, different stories, different personalities, but slowly, something strange starts happening. You begin noticing that all these different characters are connected somehow. A missing girl, a group of aspiring idols, a struggling comedian, a gangster, a corrupt cop. What seem like random stories slowly start weaving together into one massive mystery. And Odokawa, the quiet taxi driver at the center of it all, might know more than he's letting on. What makes Odd Taxi so good is the writing. The dialogue feels incredibly natural, and every conversation ends up meaning something later in the story. And by the time everything finally connects near the end, you realize the entire show is carefully building toward one incredibly clever payoff. It's smart, it's unique, and it's easily one of the most underrated anime mysteries out there. Number 14, Psycho Pass. Now, Psycho Pass explores one of the most unsettling ideas in sci-fi anime. Imagine living in a world where a system can instantly scan your mind and determine whether you're likely to commit a crime. That's the reality in this story. Society is controlled by something called the Sybil system, which constantly measures a person's mental state and assigns them a score called a Psycho Pass. If your score is clean, you live a normal life. But if your score rises too high, the system decides you're dangerous, and you can be arrested or even eliminated before you commit any crime at all. The story follows Akane Tsunemori, a new police inspector who works alongside a group of enforcers. These are former criminals whose Psycho Pass scores are already too high to live normal lives. So instead, they help hunt down others like them. But as Akane investigates more cases, she begins to realize something disturbing. The system everyone trusts to keep society safe might not actually be fair, or even moral. And when a mysterious criminal appears who can somehow avoid being detected by the Sybil system, the entire foundation of this controlled society begins to crack. What makes Psycho Pass so compelling is how it constantly asks difficult questions. Is a perfectly safe society worth the cost of total surveillance? Can a machine truly judge human morality? And what happens when the system meant to protect people becomes the thing that controls them? It's dark, philosophical, and one of the most fascinating cyberpunk anime worlds ever created. Number 15, Akudama Drive. Now, Akudama Drive feels like someone took a cyberpunk movie and turned the intensity up to 11. The story takes place in a futuristic city where society is controlled by a strict government system. Crime is punished brutally. Order is everything, but hidden beneath that system is a group of legendary criminals known as Akudama. Each one is famous for something insane. There's a brawler, a fighter who loves chaos, a hacker who can break any system, a doctor who treats murder like a hobby, and several other criminals who are basically walking disasters. One day, these criminals are all brought together for what seems like a simple mission: break someone out of prison. But very quickly, the situation spirals out of control. What started as a small job turns into a massive chase involving the government, assassins, and secrets about how the entire city actually works. And somehow, caught in the middle of all this chaos, is a completely normal girl who accidentally gets mistaken for a criminal. So now she has to pretend to be one of the most dangerous Akudama just to survive. What makes Akudama Drive stand out is the style. The neon cyberpunk world looks incredible. The action is fast and explosive, and the characters are all wildly different personalities, forced to work together. But underneath all the action, the story slowly reveals a darker truth about the society they live in. And by the end, Akudama Drive turns into a surprisingly emotional story about identity, sacrifice, and rebellion. Number 16, Black Clover. Now, Black Clover is one of those anime that fully embraces classic shonen energy. The story takes place in a world where magic is everything. Your status, your power, even your future in society is basically determined by how strong your magic is. But the main character, Asta, has a pretty big problem. He has no magic at all. Zero. In a world where even ordinary people can use magic, Asta can't use a single spell. And yet somehow, he still has the biggest dream of anyone in the series. He wants to become the Wizard King, the strongest magic user in the entire kingdom, which sounds completely impossible. But instead of giving up, Asta trains his body relentlessly, and eventually he gains access to something incredibly rare, a mysterious anti-magic power that can cancel out other people's spells. From that point on, the story becomes a classic underdog journey. Asta joins a squad of misfit knights known as the Black Bulls, a group filled with chaotic personalities who don't exactly fit the kingdom's idea of elite magic users. But together they slowly prove themselves through battle after battle. What makes Black Clover fun is the pure momentum. The fights get bigger, the powers get crazier, and Asta's determination never really slows down. It's loud, energetic, and a perfect example of the kind of high-energy shonen adventure anime fans love. Anime number 17, Demon Slayer. Now, Demon Slayer is one of the biggest anime hits of the last few years. And honestly, it's not hard to see why. The story follows Tanjiro, a kind-hearted boy who lives peacefully with his family in the mountains. But one day, while he's away from home, demons attack his house. When he returns, his entire family has been slaughtered, all except for his younger sister Nezuko, who survives. But she's been turned into a demon. Instead of losing her humanity completely, Nezuko somehow manages to hold on to part of herself. And that's what pushes Tanjiro to make a decision. He joins the Demon Slayer Corps, a group of warriors dedicated to hunting down demons, not just to protect people, but to find a way to turn his sister back into a human. What makes Demon Slayer stand out immediately is the visuals. The fight scenes are absolutely stunning. Some of the sword techniques look more like moving paintings than animation. But the emotional core of the story is what really carries it. Tanjiro isn't driven by anger or revenge. He's driven by compassion, even toward the demons he fights. And that combination of beautiful animation, intense battles, and emotional storytelling is exactly why Demon Slayer became such a massive phenomenon. Number 18, Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, Jujutsu Kaisen wastes absolutely no time getting interesting. The story starts with Yuji Itadori, a high school student who's ridiculously strong for no normal reason. He's fast, athletic, and could easily dominate any sports team. But instead, he spends most of his time hanging out in the school's occult club, messing around with paranormal stuff. That is, until they accidentally open a cursed object. In this world, negative human emotions create supernatural monsters called curses. And the object they found happens to contain one of the most dangerous curses ever, a legendary being named Sukuna. To stop the curse from being unleashed, Yuji makes a very questionable decision. He eats the cursed object, which means Sukuna now lives inside his body. But instead of immediately losing control, Yuji somehow manages to suppress him. And that catches the attention of the Jujutsu Sorcerers, a secret group of fighters who hunt curses and protect people from supernatural threats. From there, Yuji enrolls in a school that trains sorcerers to battle these monsters. And the show quickly becomes a mix of intense, supernatural fights, unique, cursed abilities, and a cast of characters with very different personalities. What really makes Jujutsu Kaisen stand out is how polished everything feels. The animation is incredible. The fight choreography is fast and creative. And the characters, especially people like Gojo, bring a ton of personality to the story. It's one of the reasons Jujutsu Kaisen became one of the most popular modern action anime almost instantly. Number 19, Magi, the Labyrinth of Magic. Now Magi, the Labyrinth of Magic feels like stepping into a giant fantasy adventure. The world is inspired by Arabian Nights stories filled with deserts, kingdoms, magic, and mysterious towers called dungeons that appear across the land. Inside these dungeons are powerful treasures that can grant someone incredible abilities. But clearing one is almost impossible. The story begins with a young traveler named Aladdin, a cheerful boy who carries a magical flute that can summon a powerful jinn. Along the way, he meets Alibaba, a poor but ambitious young man who dreams of conquering a dungeon and changing his life forever. Together, they decide to challenge one of these mysterious towers, and that's when the story really begins to expand. Because the deeper they get into the world of Magi, the bigger everything becomes. Different kingdoms, political conflicts, powerful magic users, and legendary warriors known as dungeon capturers who control powerful jinn. What makes Magi really enjoyable is how it balances adventure, humor, and world building. It starts as a simple treasure hunting journey, but eventually grows into a massive story involving empires, alliances, and magical power struggles. And by the time the story opens up fully, Magi becomes one of those anime that feels like a grand fantasy journey across an entire world. Number 20, Kill la Kill. Now, Kill la Kill is one of the most chaotic anime experiences you'll ever watch, and I mean that in the best way possible. The story follows Ryuko Matoi, a girl traveling from school to school, searching for the person who killed her father. Her only clue is half of a giant red scissor blade that she carries as a weapon. Eventually, she arrives at Honuji Academy, a school ruled by an incredibly powerful student council. And in this school, status is determined by something called Goku uniforms. These uniforms give students supernatural abilities depending on how many stars they have. 1-star uniforms are already powerful. But the elite students wear 3-star uniforms, which basically turn them into walking boss fights. At first, Ryuko doesn't stand a chance. But then she discovers something strange in her house. A living sailor uniform called Senketsu. Yes, a talking uniform. And when she wears it, she gains the power to fight the elite students head on. From that moment on, the anime becomes an absolutely wild ride of over-the-top battles, ridiculous characters, insane plot twists, and non-stop energy. But underneath all the chaos, the story is actually about identity, control, and rebellion against systems that try to define who you are. Kill la Kill is loud, it's ridiculous, and somehow it still manages to tell a surprisingly meaningful story, which is exactly why it became one of the most memorable action anime of its time. Number 21, Angel Beats. Now, Angel Beats starts with one of the most confusing openings on this list. A guy named Otonashi wakes up in a strange school with no memories of his past life. And the first thing someone tells him is, "Welcome to the afterlife." Naturally, that raises a few questions, but things get even stranger when he meets a group of students who are literally fighting against an angel. Or at least, that's what they call her. This mysterious girl named Kanade has supernatural powers and acts like the enforcer of this strange world. Meanwhile, the other students have formed something called the Afterlife Battlefront, a group dedicated to rebelling against what they believe is an unfair fate. At first, the show feels almost like a comedy. There are ridiculous missions, chaotic fights, and a lot of funny moments between the characters. But slowly, the truth about this world starts to reveal itself. Each of these students ended up here because their lives in the real world were filled with regret, pain, or unfinished feelings. And this strange afterlife might actually exist to help them finally find peace. That's when Angel Beats shifts from a fun action comedy into a surprisingly emotional story about acceptance, moving on, and saying goodbye. And by the time the final episodes arrive, it becomes one of those anime that leaves a lot of viewers completely emotional by the end. Number 22, Fooly Cooly. Now, Fooly Cooly is probably the strangest anime on this entire list. And that's saying something. The story follows a normal kid named Naota, who lives in a quiet town where nothing exciting ever happens. His older brother left to play baseball in America. His life feels boring, predictable, and kind of empty. But that all changes when a mysterious girl named Haruko suddenly crashes into his life. Literally, she runs him over with a scooter, hits him in the head with a guitar, and somehow ends up living in his house. And from that moment on, reality basically stops making sense. Robots start coming out of Naota's head. Giant battles appear out of nowhere, and Haruko seems to be hiding some kind of secret mission involving a strange corporation called Medical Mechanica. The thing about Fooly Cooly is that the story feels chaotic on purpose. Scenes move fast, random things happen constantly, and it almost feels like the show is daring you to keep up. But underneath all the weirdness, Fooly Cooly is actually about something very relatable. Growing up, feeling confused about your place in the world, and dealing with the messy emotions that come with becoming an adult. It's short, strange, and incredibly creative. And even years later, Fooly Cooly is still considered one of the most unique anime ever made. Number 23, Samurai Champloo. Now, Samurai Champloo is one of those anime that just feels cool. The story takes place in Edo-era Japan, but with a strange twist, because somehow this historical setting is mixed with hip-hop culture. You've got samurai battles, traditional villages, and feudal Japan. But the soundtrack is full of hip-hop beats, record scratches, and modern vibes. And somehow it works perfectly. The story begins when a waitress named Fu gets caught in the middle of a fight between two completely opposite samurai. First there's Mugen, wild, unpredictable, and fighting with a chaotic breakdance style sword technique. Then there's Jin, calm, disciplined, and a master of traditional samurai swordsmanship. These two absolutely cannot stand each other, but after a series of events lands them all in trouble. Fu convinces them to help her on a journey. She's searching for a mysterious warrior known only as the samurai who smells of sunflowers. So the three of them begin traveling across Japan together, and along the way they run into all kinds of strange situations. Bandits, corrupt officials, rival warriors, even ridiculous side adventures. But what really makes Samurai Champloo special is the style. The animation is smooth, the fights are incredibly creative, and the music gives the entire show a unique identity. It's stylish, funny, emotional at times, and easily one of the coolest samurai anime ever made. Number 24, Bakano. Now, Bakano is one of the most unique storytelling experiences in anime, because when the show starts, it feels completely chaotic. You're introduced to a bunch of different characters, a group of mafia members, a pair of ridiculously chaotic thieves, a mysterious immortal alchemist, and several other people whose stories don't seem connected at all. On top of that, the timeline keeps jumping around. One moment you're in the 1930s on a train called the Flying Pussyfoot. Then suddenly the story jumps to events happening years earlier. Then it jumps forward again. At first it feels confusing, but slowly you start realizing something clever. All of these different characters and timelines are connected, and every episode reveals another piece of the puzzle. The show blends together mafia crime stories, supernatural immortality, dark humor, and intense action. And somehow it balances all of it perfectly. But the real highlight of Bakano is the characters, especially a pair of criminals named Isaac and Miria, who might be the most chaotic and lovable duo in anime. By the time the story finally comes together, you realize the entire show was like a giant puzzle where every piece eventually fits. It's fast, stylish, and incredibly entertaining. And once everything clicks, Bakano becomes one of the most satisfying non-linear anime stories ever told. Number 25, Ping Pong, the animation. Now, Ping Pong, the animation, might be the anime that surprised me the most visually. Because when you first see it, it doesn't look like most anime at all. The art style is rough, sketchy, and very different from the polished animation you usually see. But once you actually start watching it, you realize that style is exactly what makes the show work. The story follows two childhood friends who play competitive table tennis. First, there's Peko, a naturally talented player who loves the game but doesn't always take it seriously. And then there's Smile, a quiet and emotionless player who rarely shows how skilled he actually is. As the story progresses, both of them begin facing stronger opponents from different schools, players with completely different personalities, motivations, and struggles. And that's where the anime really shines, because Ping Pong the animation isn't just about sports, it's about pressure, ambition, talent, and the mental side of competition. Every character has their own reason for playing. Some want to prove themselves, some are chasing dreams, others are trying to escape the expectations placed on them. And the matches themselves feel incredibly intense, even though it's just table tennis. By the end of the story, you realize Ping Pong the animation isn't really about the sport at all. It's about growth, identity, and what it means to truly love something you're good at. And that's why it's often considered one of the best sports anime ever made, despite looking completely different from the rest. Number 26, Kaiji. Now, Kaiji might be one of the most stressful anime you'll ever watch. The story follows a guy named Kaiji, who honestly starts out as kind of a mess. He's broke, unemployed, and spends most of his time wasting his life away. But everything changes when he gets dragged into a dangerous situation involving massive debt. To pay it off, Kaiji is given a terrifying option. Enter a series of underground gambling games where the stakes are unbelievably high. And I don't mean just money. In these games, losing can mean things like losing years of your life to forced labor, permanent injuries, or having your future completely destroyed. One of the first games takes place on a ship where players gamble using a strange version of rock, paper, scissors. Sounds simple, right? Except every move could determine whether someone escapes their debt or ends up trapped for years. What makes Kaiji so intense is the psychological tension. Every player is desperate, everyone is trying to outsmart each other, and every decision feels like it could ruin someone's life. The anime constantly puts Kaiji in situations where he has to rely on pure strategy, courage, and sometimes sheer desperation just to survive. It's stressful, it's dramatic, and somehow even something as simple as rock, paper, scissors becomes edge of your seat suspense. If you enjoy psychological mind games and high-stakes tension, Kaiji is easily one of the most gripping anime in that genre. Number 27, Monster. Now Monster is easily one of the darkest anime on this entire list. The story follows Dr. Kenzo Tenma, a brilliant surgeon working in Germany. He's respected, successful, and known for saving countless lives. But one night he's forced to make a difficult decision. Two patients arrive at the hospital. One is a powerful politician. The other is a young boy who was shot in the head. Tenma is ordered to operate on the politician first because of his status. But instead, Tenma chooses to save the boy. And that single decision completely changes his life. Because years later, that boy grows up to become Johann Liebert, one of the most terrifying villains in anime. A manipulative genius capable of convincing people to destroy their own lives. When Tenma realizes the monster he saved, he makes a new decision. If he was responsible for saving Johann's life, then it's his responsibility to stop him. What follows is a slow, intense, psychological journey across Europe. As Tenma searches for Johann, the story explores the lives of many different people affected by Johann's influence. And that's what makes Monster so powerful. It isn't about action, it's about psychology, about morality, about how a single person can manipulate others in terrifying ways. And by the end of the series, you're left with one haunting question. What truly creates a monster? The person themselves, or the world that shaped them? Number 28, Mushoku Tensei. Now, Mushoku Tensei is often called one of the anime that helped redefine the modern isekai genre. The story begins with a man who completely wasted his life. He spent years isolated, unemployed, and full of regrets about the choices he made. But after a sudden accident, he dies and is reborn in a completely different world. A fantasy world filled with magic, monsters, and adventure. This time he's reborn as a baby named Rudeus Greyrat. But unlike most isekai protagonists, Rudeus remembers everything from his past life. All the mistakes, all the regrets, all the things he wishes he could have done differently. So he makes a decision. If he's been given a second chance at life, he's going to try and live it better this time. And from there, the story follows Rudeus growing up in this magical world, learning powerful magic, meeting new companions, traveling across different countries, and slowly trying to become a better person than he was before. What makes Mushoku Tensei stand out is the world building. The fantasy world feels massive and detailed. Different cultures, different regions, different magical systems. Everything feels carefully developed. And the animation quality is incredibly high, especially during the big action moments. But at its core, the story is really about growth. Not just becoming stronger, but becoming a better human being. And that's why Mushoku Tensei ended up becoming one of the most talked about fantasy anime in recent years. Number 29, Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Now, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is one of those anime that grabs your attention immediately and never really slows down. The story takes place in Night City, a futuristic world where technology has advanced so far that people can replace almost every part of their body with cybernetic upgrades. Sounds cool, right? Well, there's a catch. The more cybernetics someone installs, the higher the risk of something called cyberpsychosis, a condition where the mind completely breaks under the strain of all that technology. And when that happens, people lose control and become extremely dangerous. The story follows a teenager named David Martinez, who grows up in the poorer parts of Night City. After a tragedy turns his life upside down, David installs a powerful piece of military cyberware into his body. Something that should be way too dangerous for a normal person to use. But somehow, David can handle it. This pulls him into the world of Edgerunners, a group of mercenaries who take on illegal and extremely risky jobs across the city. From there, the anime becomes a fast-paced story filled with intense action, dangerous missions, powerful cybernetic abilities, and a crew of unforgettable characters. But what really makes Cyberpunk Edgerunners stand out is the emotional story underneath all the chaos. Because in a world like Night City, everyone is chasing something: money, freedom, a better life. But the city has a way of chewing people up and spitting them back out. And by the end of the story, Cyberpunk Edgerunners becomes one of the most powerful and tragic sci-fi anime in recent years. Number 30, Ranking of Kings. Now, Ranking of Kings might be the anime that surprised me the most on this entire list. Because when you first see it, it almost looks like a children's cartoon. The art style is simple, the characters look soft and storybook-like. And at first glance, you might assume the story is light and cheerful. But that assumption disappears very quickly. The story follows Boji, a young prince who dreams of becoming a great king. There's just one problem, actually, several problems. Boji is deaf, physically weak, and most people in the kingdom believe he's completely incapable of ruling. People laugh at him, they underestimate him, even some members of the royal court doubt him. But despite all of that, Boji refuses to give up on his dream. Along the way, he meets a mysterious shadow creature named Kage, who becomes his first true friend. And together they begin a journey that slowly reveals the secrets of the kingdom, the royal family, and the difficult path Boji must walk to prove himself. What makes Ranking of Kings so powerful is its characters. Almost everyone in the story has hidden motivations, painful pasts, or complicated reasons for the choices they make. Even characters you think are villains at first can end up being far more complex than they seem. And watching Boji slowly grow stronger, not just physically, but emotionally, becomes incredibly inspiring. By the end of the story, Ranking of Kings turns into a beautiful story about kindness, perseverance, and what it truly means to be strong. And that's why it ended up being one of the most unexpectedly emotional anime on this entire list. Completely different genres, completely different worlds, but every one of them has something memorable. And that's what made this challenge so fun. Because some of the anime I expected to be average ended up becoming some of my favorite discoveries from the entire list. And honestly, it makes me wonder how many other hidden gems are still out there that I haven't watched yet. So if you've seen any of the anime from this list, I'm curious. Which one was your favorite? And more importantly, What anime would you recommend next? Because if this experiment proved anything, it's that the anime community always seems to have another great recommendation waiting.